Hello everyone, I'm Mattia Baggini and today in this lesson I will talk about how to prepare a good documentation. Let's starting by defining what is a documentation. A documentation is a crucial component of any software project. It contains the requirements, design, implementation, and also the deployment of the software. It ensures that the project remains maintainable, understandable, and accessible to the various stakeholders over time. Those stakeholders can be users, can be developers. Now let's see why do we need it. We need documentation for several reasons. For example, for the end users, because it helps the final users to understand how to use the software. It also improves efficiency by reducing the amount of time that the developers spend figuring out how the different part of the code base works. It also helps in maintaining code over time because it creates a file where all the project, we can say, knowledge is stored. And of course, this knowledge can be easily shared and it make easy to new developers to quickly learn about the project. Here we have a video recommendation by Mentor Vedant that explains why good documentation is so important, especially for a clean and clear communication. It's a valuable resource worth watching. Now let's explore different type of documentation that vary in format, purpose, and audience. Let's start from user manual. A user manual is a guide designed to help people to understand how to use a product, a service, or a system. It provides clear step-by-step instructions and essential information to ensure the user can operate with the product effectively and safely. The purpose is to help users use the product easily and correctly. It also aims to improve the user experience of the project by offering guidance, reducing confusion, and minimizing errors and off during the product use. The audience of user manual is the end users who may not have the technical experience and expertise, but they need to understand how to interact, how to use the product. Now we will see an example from VirtualBox. Okay, so here we have, for example, the user manual of VirtualBox application, where the user can learn and read about how to use the application. We can see step-by-step instruction to how to interact with the application, or for example, how to use a particular functionalities. For example, create a virtual machine. We have a step-by-step instructions. We have some explanation of every part of the application. So the user can learn how interact, how to use the application in the best way. Okay, so now let's look at the technical documentation. Technical documentation explain how a product works in detail, usually for developers, engineers, or other technical users. It often includes example of code and information on the system design and architecture and setup. The purpose is to provide a detailed technical explanation and description of the architecture used by the system or the application that is needed to understand, develop, and maintain the product. Now let's see the Google Maps Flutter library example. Okay, so here we have the technical documentation of Google Maps Flutter library. As you can see, we have a list of classes that the library use. For each class, we can read a description, we can read the properties, the functions, the parameters. So this documentation is for the technical users, like developers that need those information for build on the application of the software product and interact with the system. Okay, so now let's look at the installation documentation. That is a document that gives step-by-step instructions for setting up or install a software product. And the purpose is to make sure that the product is installed correctly by the users. Now let's see the Liquid Galaxy Core GitHub installation documentation example. Okay, so here we have the installation documentation of the Liquid Galaxy Core. Here the user can learn, can read how to set up or install on his machine the Liquid Galaxy Core system. He can read the requirements, he can read the scripts that are needed for the installation, and he can read all the information needed for a clean and correct installation. Okay, now let's talk about structuring the documentation. To create a clear and easy to follow documentation, we can divide the document into sections. Each section should cover a specific aspect of the product or the process. This organization helps readers to quickly find the information, the topics that they need. So include an index or a table of contents at the beginning of your documentation. Use consistent formatting in your documentation, so includes headers, subheaders, fonts, and bullet points that must be consistent in your file. Keep the formatting consistent to make the document easier to read and more professional. Screenshot. We can also add the screenshots to provide a clear visual reference, making instruction easier to follow. By including description, we provide to the user a visual guide that helps to understand and follow the instruction more easily. Screenshot can also help reduce the mistakes and improve the overall user experience. We can also add the code snippets. Code snippets are a small piece of code that are included in our documentation that show users how to perform a specific task or how to use the code. They offer a practical example in a real-world context that helps the user to understand how to use a particular function or a particular feature. Seeing actual code can make it easier to understand also abstract concept. Instead of just reading about how a function works, user can approach a real example. When creating a documentation, so use code snippets that are specific to the language and framework your audience is using. This makes the documentation more relevant and easy to understand. Also include explanation and comments within the code to make it accessible to user with different levels of experience. You can also add a Q&A and common error section. A Q&A section can answer the most common question user have about the software or the system. Adding a Q&A section and a common error section help users to understand how to use the software and the system more easily. These sections address typically questions and problems that users might have, providing a clear and direction solution. For each common error, provide a clear explanation of why it happens and how to fix it. This can save users a lot of time and reduce frustration, improve the overall user experience with the documentation. You can also add a changelog. A changelog is a simple list that shows all the important changes made to a product. It helps users to know about updates, new features, bug fix, and improvements. Each update in a changelog has a version number, which helps users to understand which changes were made in each update. Clearly describe what has been changed, added, fixed, or removed in each update. Be specific so that users can understand what has been done in this version of the application. Regularly update the changelog with every new release of your product, no matter how small the update is. So, what are the best practices to follow when you are preparing your documentation? Keep documentation updated. So, treat documentation as an important part of your project. So, update it as the project changes. So, regularly delete any outdated, deprecated, unnecessary part of the documentation to keep things clear. Tailor the content to your audience. So, write the documentation to fit the expertise, the knowledge of the users who will use it. Include the useful links and resources. So, try to keep the documentation interconnected whenever possible. Also add some examples, includes practical examples to illustrate the key concept that helps users to understand how to apply the information that they are reading. What makes a documentation better than others? Clarity, so the information is clear, concise, and easy to understand. Usability, so the user can easily find the information they need. And accuracy, so the information is corrected and up to date with the project. So now let's talk about biases in documentation. Biases in documentation can happen when the content is written from a single perspective, often reflecting the author's own knowledge and assumptions. This can make the documentation less useful or even confusing for users with different experiences or backgrounds. To minimize those biases, you can involve different users, so get feedback from a wide range of users with different backgrounds, so and listen to his perspectives. Use a clear language, so avoid the technical terms that might not be familiar to everyone, or explain it in a easy way. Avoid assumptions, so you should not assume that all the users have the same level or of expertise or familiarity with the subject. So provide explanation for a concept that might be new to some users. Let's talk about the code and documentation. A good documentation starts from a good project. So write a good code base, write a clean code while write organized code. Properly comment also your code, explain the logic and the flow of it. This is crucial for anyone who is trying to understand your code. Also use docstrings. Use docstrings in functions, classes, and modules to provide a quick reference for what each component does. This will be important later when we will talk about auto-generating documentation. Follow the application technology standards. So use the standard rules and the best practice of the technology your project use. A documentation cannot be created from a bad project, a bad code base. So start with a good code base. Now we will see the Darkdoc tool. Documentation tools like Darkdoc are designed to automatically generate documentation from your code base, from your source code. They help to create clear, consistent, and professional documentation. This saves a lot of time and ensures that the documentation is always updated with the code. Documentation tools can provide the details information about classes, methods, functions, and properties. They can include descriptions, parameter list, returns types, and examples. As you write, your Dart code include clear and descriptive comments. These comments will be used by Dartdoc to generate the documentation. So focus explaining the purpose of the classes, the methods, the function, the parameters, and the return values. Now we will see a real-world example of Dartdoc. Okay, so let's start from a demo project. Here we have some classes like circle, triangle, pointer, rectangle. Each class has a lot of functions, parameters, and comments. Those comments follows the rules of Dardoc. So, for example, this comment reference the type of the class, or this references points to the parameters or the arguments. So those codes follows the guidelines of Dardoc. So how we can generate a documentation from this code. First, we will need to enable to activate the Dardoc functions by entering flutter pub global activate Dardoc command in the terminal. Let's wait for some seconds. Okay. Now we will need to call this function. So let's call Dardoc tool by entering a Dartdoc command in terminal. Now this requires some seconds to some minutes, depending by the size of your project, but let's wait. Okay, so a doc folder will be generated in our project. Now let's see the API folder, and we will look for index.html. Let's open it, for example, in a browser. Here we will see a description of our project. We will see the classes that we had in the project. We can, for each class, we can read some descriptions. We can read all the technical data about the class, so the methods, the operators, the type of the return values, the parameters of the functions. So here we have a list of all the technical functionalities that the application has. So with this method, you only need to well comment to have your code well comment, and you can generate very professional and good looking documentation. That's all. Here you have a list of links like Dart comments with lines, Dart style standards, Dart doc package that can help you to generate very beautiful and useful documentation. Here you have also a link to a well-written documentation that is Stripe. So what did we learn today? We learn about what is documentation, different types of documentation, how to structure well a documentation, what we can use in a documentation, for example, screenshot, code snippets, Q&A, common errors, changelog, what are the best practices to build to prepare a good documentation, what are the documentation biases, with documentation and the code, and we talk also about the Dartdoc tool. That's all. Thank you for watching. I hope you like this lesson. And if you still have some questions, you can find me here on Gmail or on Discord. And I want to thank you also my mentor, Victor Sanchez Belmar, for helping me in this lesson and teaching me these concepts. I hope we will see you soon and bye bye.